In this video, we'll learn about promises and how you can make the most of them in JavaScript. Keep watching until the end of the video for an example scenario using the Fetch API. Hey guys, and welcome to Dual Coding. To get started, I've set up some very basic HTML and CSS along with a script that I've set to defer, which will mean it'll run once the page is ready. Let's start with the basic structure of a promise and what it's used for. Promises in JavaScript are essentially what they sound like, a piece of code that promises to return a result at some point. We can of course break a promise by adding bugs in our code, but we're not going to do that today. Let's look at an example. If we're making a request to get an image using the fetch function, this will return a promise, not the actual response straight away. The response will only be returned when the server holding that image sends it to us. In this case, the promise can be resolved once a valid response is received, or rejected if there's an issue, like the image we're getting doesn't exist. Now let's go back to our JavaScript file. We can create a new promise like this, and we can define a resolve and reject function that we're able to call inside to indicate when the promise has been fulfilled, or when it's been rejected due to some sort of error. I'll set a timeout to 5 seconds inside the function, so that once 5 seconds have passed, we'll resolve the promise with a value of done. It's worth noting that this won't block any following lines of code as it runs asynchronously, so anything we add after it will get run straight away. Let's go to the console and see what our promise variable looks like. As you can see, the promise is set to pending, which means it's still waiting for a result. If we try again now that 5 seconds have passed, you can see that the promise has been fulfilled successfully with a value of done. We can also make use of the reject function this time. And after 5 seconds have passed, we get an error in the console, and if we were to take a look at the promise, you can see that it's been rejected. But most of the time, like when fetching an image, we don't know when the promise will be fulfilled. So instead of checking it ourselves periodically, we can use then and catch to look out for those resolve and reject events. Let's create a new promise this time and set it to resolve after 1 second with a value of done. We'll then add a then function onto the end of it, and this will take the result of the promise as a parameter. Once the promise has been fulfilled or resolved, we'll log the result. As you can see in the console, the result gets logged after 1 second. But what will happen if we change resolve to reject here? Then we'll get an error in the console because we haven't handled it. We can do this by adding a catch function onto the end of all this and log the error that we passed through the reject function above. And now we can see the console log for the error as expected. We can also chain these functions, which you might want to do if you're loading one thing after the other. As you can see here, I've created a promise that will resolve after 1 second, at which point I've logged the result. Then after that, I return a new promise that will also resolve after 1 second. I can log the result of this promise in another then function, and so on. If we look in the console, we get the number 1 returned after 1 second, and the number 2 1 second after that. Let's now look at how we can deal with multiple promises at once. I've declared 2 functions here. The delay function returns a promise that resolves successfully after a given number of seconds, and the delay error function returns a promise that fails after so many seconds. We can use Promise.all with a list of promises, and this will return a list of results corresponding to each promise. We'll use the delay function here for 1, 2 and 3 seconds. We'll just need to use then afterwards, and console log the results. Promise.all only returns once after all the promises have been fulfilled. The longest delay here we have is 3 seconds, so we should get a result after that time. If we check the console, you can see that all the results have been returned. Another one is Promise.any, which will return once any one of the promises provided is fulfilled. Even if all of the promises eventually resolve, we're just interested in the first one here. So if we look in the console, we can see the number 1 because that took the shortest time to resolve. Let's change the first one to a delay error function so that it rejects. If we check the console, the number 2 is returned because now that one was the first to resolve. However, if we were to use Promise.all with a rejected response, we get an error in the console because we needed all the promises to resolve. If we're interested in the error here, we can add on a catch function and console log the error of the first promise to be rejected like so. But ideally, we'd want to get the results of all promises and see which ones were successful and which ones failed. Luckily, we can do this with Promise.all settled. In the console, after 3 seconds in our case, we're now able to see the one that was fulfilled and the value it returned, and also the ones that were rejected with the error too. Let's see if we can use this to load images onto our site. I've got a list of links here that each return a response with a thumbnail URL field like this, including an incorrect URL to see how we handle errors. We can use Promise.all settled and pass it in the data we want to fetch. We can do this by mapping each URL to a fetch response that will hopefully return the image data we want. As you can see here, the fetch function returns a promise, so as we've seen before, we can use then to handle the result of all fetch promises, whether they resolved or not. For each promise result, we'll first check if the promise was fulfilled successfully, and then console log the value, which will be the fetch response. And then we can check if the promise was rejected, at which point we can use the reason property to get the error. If we check in the console, we've got 2 successful responses with status 200, and 1 error that says failed to fetch because of the invalid URL. Let's create an add-image function to add our images to the site. This function will take the fetch response, and so to get the JSON response, we'll need to use this function, which also returns a promise. Once that JSON promise is fulfilled, we'll create an image element, set its source attribute, and append it to the body. Let's look at the browser again. And there we are, the images have been added successfully. If you're looking for some example apps, I've created a suite of desktop and Android apps that are all open source, and I've also made a language insight built with Eleventy that's 100% free. Check them both out in the description down below. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to keep up to date with the latest from Azul Coding. Thanks for watching and I'll see you soon.